Today's episode of Off the Timeline is titled What If Jonathan Taylor Went to Florida and Won the Heisman? Jonathan Taylor didn't just run for 6,000 plus yards at Wisconsin, he almost changed how college football works. Because if he picks Florida instead of Wisconsin in 2017, he doesn't just put up numbers, he wins the Heisman, breaks the SEC's defensive identity, and forces the entire sport to pivot right before Joe Burrow forces the sport to repivot anyways. And if you think one running back doesn't change anything, you're about to see Wisconsin collapse, Florida completely reinvent itself, and the SEC quietly admit they were not built to stop this. But first, let's rewind to 2017. Jonathan Taylor is one of the most productive running backs we have ever seen. But he's not supposed to be a Heisman guy. He's supposed to be a Wisconsin guy. Big offensive line, downhill runs, 25 carries a game. The system works, the numbers flow, but here's the problem. That only works in Wisconsin's world, because in Florida's world, they didn't have an identity at all. Now, Florida in 2017 wasn't missing talent. They were missing a center of gravity, quarterback instability, inconsistent play calling, and no identity. So in this timeline, instead of going north, Taylor goes south, and everything simplifies instantly. Florida doesn't try to be clever anymore. They just say, we're giving the ball to him and you're going to deal with it. And this is where people could get it wrong. They think that Taylor would just be good in the SEC. No, he would be different. Because SEC defenses in 2017 to 2018 were built to stop spread offenses, speed, space, and tempo. Not 25 carries a game and definitely not 30 carries a game. Not 4 quarters of the same run over and over. Taylor isn't just productive, he's exhausting. And this sets the table for the 2017 season. Year one doesn't break the sport, but it plants the seed. He goes for 1,600 yards, plenty of chunk plays, and Florida starts winning ugly games. And more importantly, they stop beating themselves. Because now, every game has a baseline. If nothing else works, we still have this. And that sets the table for the escalation. But 2018, that's when it flips. Because now the offensive line adjusts, the playbook adjusts, the defense starts feeding off shorter fields, and Taylor becomes the entire identity. And then the game happens. And that signature game comes against Georgia, and Taylor runs for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns. Florida controls the game from start to finish, and suddenly this isn't a fun what if anymore. This is a problem, because now the SEC has to answer a question they weren't ready for. What happens when the best player on the field gets stronger the more you try to tackle him? And that sets the table for the Heisman build. Now zoom out nationally. In 2018, Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins both had incredible seasons, but they start splitting the Heisman narrative. Meanwhile, Taylor is doing the same thing every week: production, wins, and establishing identity. And voters start to change their thinking. Maybe the most valuable player isn't the one throwing 50 touchdowns. Maybe it's the one you literally cannot take off the field. And that's how Jonathan Taylor wins the 2018 Heisman in this alternate universe. And that sets the table for the ripple. Because the Heisman isn't the biggest and only change, Wisconsin is. Because without Taylor, the system doesn't collapse, but it gets much weaker. Offensive line recruiting dips. The next back isn't quite the same, and suddenly Wisconsin's not inevitable anymore. Meanwhile, in the SEC, defenses start adjusting. Heavier boxes, larger linebackers, and right as they start to adapt, Joe Burrow shows up in 2019 and forces them to readapt anyways. And that's the twist. Jonathan Taylor didn't stop what was coming. He forced the sport to evolve right before it had to evolve again. Now, Jonathan Taylor didn't just leave Wisconsin, he took an identity with him, dropped it into the SEC, and for one season reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest thing in football is the hardest thing to stop. Now, if you enjoyed this college football alternate history deep dive, Make sure to hit like, comment, subscribe, and check out the videos on your end screen. And I'll see you in the next timeline.